Chen Shiju. It is said that Chen Shiju is a native of Pai County in Jiangsu Province, and his father, Chen Ziyan, is a famous citizen of this county. Zhou, the county's richest man, admired the prestige of Chen Ziyan, and he and the Chen family were arranged to be their sons and daughters. Mr. Chen failed to raise a person in the exam in succession, and his family's fortunes declined. Later, Chen Ziyan went on a steady trip to Kindy, and there was no news for years. Zhou secretly regretted his engagement to the Chen family. He married his younger daughter to Wang Xiaohei and became a stepgroom. The bride gift from Wang Jia was very plentiful, and the maiden carriage of the bride gift were so elegant that Zhou became increasingly despised Chen Shiju's poverty and decided to sever his engagement with the Chen family. He asks his eldest daughter, who was adamant about not getting married. In a fit of rage, Zhou dressed her daughter in battered clothes and jewelry and sent her to Chen's home. The Chen family was to pour to cook on fire all day, and at some point on Monday they were not considerate. One day, Zhou sent an elderly maid with food boxes to send her daughter some food. As soon as she entered the door, the wife told Chen's mother, "My master asked me to see if my girl was starving." I'm afraid Zhou's mother-in-law is flabbergasted, barely smiling and saying something else. After I split the subject, I took the refreshments out of the food box and put them in front of her mother-in-law. The old maid was busy stopping her and saying, "No." Since the girl came to her house, where has she been able to get a glass of water from her house? My family's food. I don't think the old lady is ashamed to eat it. Miss Chen was so angry that her voice and face changed. The old maid refused to accept it and confronted Chen Mu with unpleasant words. In the middle of an argument, Chen Shiju came in from the outside, was so angry after asking about the situation that he grabbed the old maid's hair and slapped her in the face and drove her out the door while she was beating her. The next day, Zhou came to pick up her daughter, but she refused to go back. Tomorrow comes again, and there's more people talking, arguing, like picking quarrels and fighting. Chen urged Zhou to go back, and Zhou worshipped her mother-in-law in tears and got in the car and left. A few days later, Zhou sent another person to press for a divorce document. Chen forced Chen to write the divorce papers to them. The mother and son are looking forward to seeing Chen Ziyan come home and find another way to deal with it. Someone from the Zhou family came from Xi'an and learned that Chen Ziyan had died. She was sad and angry, and she died of illness. Chen Shiju, in distress, hoped his wife would return, but after a long time, with no news at all, Mr. Chen grew sadder and angrier. He sold the family's hectares of thin fields and bought his mother funeral paraphernalia. After the funeral, Mr. Chen jostled to Jiangsu province to find his father's remains. In Xi'an, visiting locals, some said, a book died in a hotel a few years ago, buried in the eastern suburbs, and now that grave is gone. Mr. Chen had no choice but to ask for food at the market during the day, and stay at the Wildland Temple at night in the hope of meeting someone who knew about his father. One night, as he was walking through a mass grave, several people blocked his way, forcing him to pay for meals. "I'm a foreigner," Mr. Chen said. "Where do I owe money for food when I'm out in the city?" The men were furious, grabbed him to the ground and stuck him in the mouth with a rotten cotton wool that had buried the child. Mr. Chen was hoarse and was dying. Suddenly, these people were all screaming, "Where's the official coming from?" They let go immediately, and the surroundings became quiet. A few minutes later, someone asked, "Who's lying there?" Immediately, several people carried Mr. Chen to the side of the car. The man in the car said, "My son. How could the devil do this to him? They should all be bundled together and not one left out." Mr. Chen thought someone had removed the rotten cotton tiles from his mouth. He settled down a little, carefully identified, and the man in the car was certainly a father. Crying, "My son suffered so much to find his father's bones that I didn't expect you to be alive today. I'm not a child, I'm the head of the Taixing branch of the Yin dynasty," his father said. "This time, it's for the kids." Mr. Chen cried even more, and his father persuaded him to give him comfort. Mr. Chen cried about his father-in-law's forced divorce. "Don't worry, your daughter-in-law is with your mother now," said father. "Your mother misses you so much. You can take a look for a while." So you're in the same car as Tin Kowloon, and Mercedes as fast as the wind. After a while, in front of a government office, I got out of the car and went through several doors, and I was there. Chen Shiju was about to pass out in tears. His father urged him to stop, and Chen Shiju said yes, sobbing. He saw his wife next to her and asked her, "My wife is here. So she's under the 9 springs too?" And the mother said, "No, your father picked her up. And when you get home, you have to send her back." Chen said, "My son serves his parents, so he doesn't want to go back." Mother said, "You have come all this way to seek your father's remains. You're not going back. So what was it you set out for? Besides, your god of filial piety has already known that the silver is a gift to you, and your husband and wife are still enjoying it for a long time. Why don't you go back?" Chen Shiju looked down and wept. His father urged him to leave several times, and Shiju cried and lost his voice. My father said angrily, "Haven't you left yet?" He was scared, and that's when he stopped crying and asked where his father was buried. My father pulled his arm and said, "You go. I'll tell you. 100 steps from that mass grave, there are a big, small white elm tree or two. That's where I buried my bones." My father pulled him so fast that he could not say goodbye to his mother. Outside the door, a fit servant was waiting for him with a horse. When Chen Shiju got on the horse, his father told him, "Where you sleep on a normal day. If you have a little money, you can quickly put the office back in your clothes. You can chase your daughter-in-law to your father-in-law and never stop until you get your daughter-in-law." Mr. Chen promised to leave. The horse ran very fast, and by the time the chickens were screaming, it had reached Xi'an. The servant brought him down, and he had just asked the servant to greet his parents, and the servant and horse had disappeared. Mr. Chen found his former lodging, leaning against the wall, resting with his eyes closed and waiting for the morning. He felt like there was a big, fist-ridden rock in his seat, and when it was daylight, it turned out to be a piece of silver. He bought a coffin, laid down a car, searched for the 2 barley elms, got his father's remains, and went home. After burying his parents' remains, the family was destitute with 4 walls. Thankfully, the folks have paid tribute to his filial piety and fed him. Chen Shiju was going to his father-in-law's house to claim his daughter-in-law. After considering that he could not use force, he asked Chen Shiju, the elder brother of the family, to go with him. At the gates of the Zhou family, the guards refused to notify them. Chen Shiben is a scoundrel. His words are filthy. Zhou had to send someone to persuade Chen Shiju to go home, and was willing to send his daughter to him immediately. Then Chen Shiju came home. When Zhou first returned to her mother's home, she verbally abused Chen and his mother in front of her. Zhou didn't speak, but she just wept toward the wall. Mr. Chen's mother died, and the Zhou family kept her from knowing. Zhou got a divorce letter and threw it in front of her daughter, saying, "The Chen family has taken you off. I've never been defiant. Why don't you hug me?" she said. Zhou locked her up again for questioning at her home. Later, Chen Shiju went to Xi'an, and Zhou forged the news of Chen Shiju's death to sever his daughter's will. As soon as this vicious letter was spread, Du Zhonghan came to his home to discuss and tell Zhou about his beloved daughter. Zhou actually agreed to do so, and Zhou knew about it until the day of welcoming her beloved daughter. So she cries, refuses to eat, covers her face with a quilt, and is on the verge of dying. Zhou was helpless, and suddenly heard that Chen Shiju came to his door, which was very unkind. He estimated that his daughter would die, so he sent someone to send him back to Chen Shiju's home with arms, which he intended to use as blackmail to vent his hatred until his daughter died. Chen Shiju came home, and the person who sent Zhou Nu also arrived. They are afraid that Chen Shiju refused to take in Zhou Nu because she was ill. As soon as he entered the door, he put down and laughed. The neighbors were worried about Mr. Chen, and they negotiated to take him back. When Mr. Chen disagreed and helped Ms. Chao put her to bed, she lost her temper. When Chen Shiju was in a panic, Zhou's son led several people into the room with a murder weapon and smashed the doors and windows. Mr. Chen fled and went into hiding, and the Zhou family searched for him. The villagers were upset with Mr. Chen. Chen Shiju gathered more than a dozen people to stand up and hug the disgruntled and the Zhou family's children were injured before fleeing. Zhou became angry and immediately filed a complaint with the government demanding the arrest of Chen Shiju and others. Shiju is ready to escape and leaves Zhou's body in the care of her neighbor's eldest daughter. Suddenly I heard a gasping sound in my bed, and when I looked closer, my wife's eyes pivoted slightly. After a while, I was able to turn my side. Chen Shiju went to the government to explain the situation himself. The prefectural decree was furious at Zhou's false accusation. Zhou was afraid and gave the county a heavy bribe to avoid punishment. Shiju came home. The couple met. The sadness mixed. Before that, Zhou lay dying, sworn to death. Suddenly she was pulled up and said, "I'm from the Chen family, so hurry up and follow me, and the couple can meet. Otherwise, it's too late." Zhou was unknowingly physically outside the door, and two people helped her into a saloon. Suddenly, they arrived at an official post. When they saw her in-laws here, Zhou asked, "What is this place?" My mother-in-law said, "Don't ask. I'll send you back soon." Another day, she was very happy to see Chen Shiju also coming, but was very strange to see him and then split up in a hurry. My father-in-law doesn't know what he's doing. He won't be back for days. Last night, I suddenly came back and said, "I've been delayed in Waishan, and I've been back for 2 days, and I can't stand Shiju's child. But you must return the daughter-in-law." So I drove Zhou away. Zhou suddenly saw the door of the Chen family and woke up like a dream. Both Zhou and she were surprised and delighted when they recounted the past together. I was reunited, but I couldn't make ends meet every day. Mr. Chen opened his private barbecue in the village while studying hard. He often mutters in private, "My father said to me, 'God give me gold, and now my family has nothing but 4 walls. Can teaching make a fortune?'" One day, Chen Shiju came back from the juke and met two people, asking him, "Is this Chen Shiju, sir?" Mr. Shi replied, "Yes." Those two took out the chains and locked him up. Seoku doesn't know what he's doing. After a while, the villagers gathered and asked them together before they realized they were being implicated by the county robbers. Many people sympathized with Shi's innocence, so they pocketed money to pay for poor labor, and he did not suffer during the deportation. I met Taishu in Fucheng and described my family in detail. This is the son of a famous man, gentle and polite, who behaves like a slanderer. How can he be a thief? Mr. Tai said in surprise, "I'll order you to remove the rope." The robber caught the robber from his prison and conducted a rigorous criminal interrogation. And only then did the robber confess that Zhou paid him a bribe to frame Chen Shiju. Chen Shiju also complained that his father-in-law had formed a feud with him. And Taishu became more angry, and immediately ordered him to take Zhou into custody. Mr. Tai asked Mr. Chen to go to the Huya school to discuss the relationship with his forebears. The son of Han Gong, Taishu's former Pai County governor, was also a student who studied with Chen Ziyan. So Taishu gave him 100 liters of silver as the cost of studying, and 2 mules as the ride, so that he could come to Fucheng often to examine articles. Taishu also promoted Chen's filial piety to his superiors, and all officials below the governor gave him gifts. Mr. Shi returned home on a mule, and the couple were relieved. One day, Mr. Chen's mother-in-law came crying, and she was lying in the ground refusing to get up when she met her daughter. Zhou asked her in horror to find out that Zhou had been shackled and imprisoned. Chu cried and scolded herself, wanting only to die. Chen Shiju had to go to Fucheng to intercede for Zhou. Taishu released Zhou and ordered him to atone for his sins, fined him 100 stone grains, and ordered him to give Chen Shiju a filial son. After Zhou was released, he took out the grain in the barn, mixed it with some furrows, and drove it to Shiju's home. "Your father is a gentleman's servant by a small heart," Chen told his wife. "How do I know that I will accept it and leave some furrows without any trouble?" Just laughed and pushed the grain back. The walls of Mr. Chen's family, the well-to-do, are still broken. One night, the thieves came in. When the servant sensed it, he shouted, and the robber stole only 2 mules. More than half a year later, Chen Shiju was studying one night, heard the sound of knocking on the door, asked questions but did not answer them, and called his servants up to look. When the door opened, 2 mules sneaked in, which turned out to be the same ones that had been stolen before. The mule ran to the barn, sweating and wheezing, light a candle and watch as the two mules each carry a leather pocket. And pack and look, it's full of silver. Tinku was amazed at where the two mules had come from. Later, I heard that the robbers robbed Joe's house that night and left full. The robber threw away the loot and fled. The mule recognized the old owner's home and kept running home. After Joe was released from prison, he was still badly injured, robbed by a bandit, and suffered a serious illness and died. One night, Joe dreamed her father was coming with chains and said, "What I've done all my life, it's too late to regret. Now that I've been punished in the shadows, I can't be free without your father-in-law. You begged my son-in-law to write a letter to his father." Joe woke up and cried bitterly, and Shiju asked her to tell her husband all about her dreams. Mr. Chen had thought of going too far and set off that day. When he arrived, he prepared 3 sacrifices, and after the wine was laid, he slept there hoping to meet his father. But nothing strange happened overnight, so he went home. After Mr. Joe's death, his wife and son became poor and dependent on their second son-in-law. Wang Xiaoyan, a candidate for the examination, was dismissed for embezzlement and bribery, and his family was sent to Shenyang. As the Zhou family's mother and son grew more desperate, Mr. Chen often supported them,